Let's get started. Thanks to everyone for coming. Especially after data night out, at least we got to be in the afternoon. Would have been tough to make it here in the morning, I think. Yeah, maybe we can introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about what we're going to do in the session. I'm Kent. I work on the Maps team as a product manager at Tableau.
I'm Ryan. I also am on the Maps team, dev manager.
And my name's Ashwin. I'm also on the Tableau Maps team as a product manager.
Hey, Ryan, can you maybe tell folks, too, about what did you do before you worked at Tableau?
Sure. Before Tableau, I was a consultant for 13 years of full stack web application developer, basically making the types of visualizations that Tableau creates, but from scratch and in the web for clients like the Gates Foundation and Red Cross. So lots of mapping experience, building maps and visualizations.
Yeah, Ryan's really that guy who could integrate and mash up anything. So if we have questions about that kind of stuff, well, we can cover it for sure. All right, that's us. And of course, Sarah's here in the front row as well, and she's going to help us answer some questions. Yeah, we want to start this session. Actually, it was good that Ryan asked about sort of the level of folks in the room to see that there were beginners, just so we can all get on the same page with what's possible in Tableau with respect to mapping out of the box. So we're going to cover an overview of the mapping capabilities and dig in there. We're probably going to spend, maybe 10 to 15 minutes on this first part of the time in this session, kind of going through slides, and then, and Ashwin's going to cover a little bit of a demo, and then we're going to do more of the open Q&A and cover some of those common questions that people have. Mr. Whitley, you want to cover geocoding?
Yes. I would like to rapid taste about geocoding. So this is the only picture, I think, in this deck. So here we go. So geocoding is the grandmother of mapping features in Tableau. I did check with the Tableau genealogist about that, so it's true. What is geocoding? So Tableau, when you install Tableau on your desktop or server, it comes with a built-in database full of locations. It actually has names of places around the world. It has codes like postcodes, area codes, zip codes as well. In addition to the names, it has the actual locations, so the coordinates, geographic coordinates, whether it's a point or whether it's the definition of a boundary. So that comes bundled with the installer. So what is the purpose of this? The purpose of geocoding, the geocoding feature, is to allow non-mapping experts, as well as the rest of Tableau users, to really get one click away from making a map. So what does that mean? So when you load your data source into Tableau, if it's a CSV, SQL Server, whatever it is, the geocoder scans your column names, and it's trying to make an educated guess about the contents of your column. So if it sees a column that you have that's called city, it assumes that you must have names of cities in there, or country, or postcode, and so on. So once it does that, once it detects one of these columns, it assigns it a geographic role. So there are, and once it does that, it really turns your columns into clickable objects that then create a map, basically with one double click. So it's really a quick way for you to be able to make beautiful and interactive maps in Tableau. So what are the geocoding roles and what do we support? So we have 10 geographic roles in Tableau. And now that I've said 10, I have the pressure of having to remember them all right now.
Let's go. Count them out.
Here we go. We've got country. We've got state, county, postcode. You all keeping track. City. That's half down. We've got airports, global airports. So if you have three-digit or four-letter airport codes, MSY or SEA, for example, LAX, those will automatically geocode. We've got congressional districts for the US. We have NUTS codes for European. Those are like European statistical areas. And we have area codes, and I lost count. CBSA, thank you. That's cool. Yeah, great. Core-based statistical areas. Those are like metropolitan areas. So those are the 10 types of geographies that Tableau will recognize and be able to map out of the box. So that's great. So in addition to that, there are three more geocoding-related features that aren't talked about a lot. One of them is called worldviews. The other one is synonyms, and the last one, which is partially related to geocoding, is called custom territories. So first, talk about worldviews. So interestingly, depending on where you sit in the world, Tableau will change its map boundaries, like we see, to conform either to the Chinese government's view of the world, the Indian government's view of the world, or if you're in any other locale, it will show you like a disputed border or dashed border. We call that the US or international view. So that is automatically detected by Tableau, depending on your operating system's locale settings. But you can also force that within a particular workbook by changing the workbook settings. And I'm happy to talk about this after the talk if you have more questions about that. The second geocoding-related feature is called synonyms. So synonyms are alternate names for places. So misspellings or alternate names or local names, local language names. It's really, we pack all of that information into the geocoding database, trying to make it easier to match with the data that you bring into Tableau. So just want to make you all more successful being able to geocode. And the last is custom territories, which is a feature which allows you to select multiple polygons once your map is created. If you want to create custom territories, you can select multiple polygons and basically glue them all together to make perhaps a custom sales region. The geocoding data, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, has anyone used custom territories in their workflow? Is this the first time people have heard of this feature? Can you raise your hand if it's the first time you've ever heard of it? So maybe we could just cover this real quickly. So with custom territories, there's two ways you can create them, and they only work off the data that you can geocode, right? So if you can geocode it in Tableau, you can create a custom territory. You can actually do manual grouping of points or polygons. You can go either way with whatever symbols on the map. But if you have a field in your data set that actually represents the territory, so in Superstore, there's a region field, right? You can bring region on and define the actual custom regions, and it'll be an individual mark. For those that remember prior to version 10, so go back before version 10, if you actually tried to display this kind of data, like a grouped set of values from geocoding, it would only display one mark and basically produce some really irregular looking visualization. It was almost like a defect. But we fixed it and made it better by basically allowing all of those geographies to be unioned and dissolving the interior boundaries. But the other way, yeah, so how you create it then is you can actually go to the data type, right, when you see the little globe icon in the data pane, and you can hit that drop down, and when you assign the geographic role, you can say create from, and you can actually assign it to be based off of any other geographic role or field that's in the table. So you don't have to go manually grouping everything. If your data's in there, like say you have sales territory, and you have like sales name, so the person who owns the territory, that name could be the custom territory, and you can generate the right custom geography. So it's worth playing with if any of that sounds like it might be useful to you.
I'm on the home stretch here. So we have the amount of data that's in the geocoding database is limited. We're always trying to add more useful data, add more up-to-date data. So if there's something that would be helpful for you to include by default in geocoding, come up and talk to us after the talk. We'd like to hear your suggestions. Also, if geocoding is not meeting your needs, maybe there's a country we don't support, you're able to download your own spatial files for free, often, from the internet and load those into Tableau kind of in lieu of the geocoding database. And Kent's going to talk a little bit more about Spatial File Connector after this. So yeah.
Sounds good.
Take it away.
All right. Yeah, so let's just do a quick review of some of the other improvements that have come along since version 10. So starting in, 10 had custom territories, and we started to, like at Tableau, think a lot about how are people going to answer spatial questions? How are you going to answer a location-based question if you can't actually work with native spatial data? So part of Tableau's vision, we want to help people see and understand data, obviously. And spatial data, we want to take like the special part out, right? So most tools that work with native spatial data, they're kind of specialist tools for all the people in the room that use ArcMap or QGIS. I mean, like those are tools dedicated to understanding how to work with spatial data, right? They're GIS tools. But for us to build it into Tableau, we had to make some considerations. So yes, we support shapefiles, KML, MapInfo, and GeoJSON in the 10.2 release. But a couple things to know about that. When we load that data in, we're actually transforming the data so everything will comply with our Web Mercator map and be displayed in geographic coordinates. So if you have a local projection used for your data set, we still do all the transformation so long as we support it. But we use the library Proj 4, it's formally called, it's just the 4th version of it, to do this transformation. So if anyone's following along there, you don't have to go and reproject your data outside of Tableau just to bring it in, right? We do that for you. And then in the 2018-1 release, we support spatial data from SQL Server, and we want to do more in this vein as we move forward. Again, if part of our goal is to connect to spatial data so that anyone can use it, there's lots of data sources out there. So Postgres, Oracle, like these are the other common traditional databases that a lot of people use. And I can imagine we're going to build something similar for SQL Server in that regard. And then, another interesting thing though is, like Google BigQuery and some of the Amazon cloud sources, Azure, like they're all going to support spatial data. BigQuery just released or announced a capability called BigQuery GIS in July. Did anyone see that announcement? I'm always curious to see like if people are like reading the blogs or not, right? But the fact that BigQuery's done it, they're pushing all these spatial capabilities to the people who are moving to the cloud and kind of making it first class, right? And so, when Tableau customers start to adopt and use those capabilities, we want to get ahead of that too, right? So we'd love to hear how people are using, or what data sources people are using, if you're moving to the cloud, and even thinking a little bit further out as to how you might leverage some of those capabilities and those sources. The 2018.3 release, which is scheduled to be released, I think next week, will include support for Esri file databases and TopoJSON, so you can make connections directly to those sources. When you connect to an Esri file geodatabase, you can only pick one table, so you don't get all of the contents loaded into Tableau. It's just we'll read the container, and you can choose the table that you want to work with. So for background maps, so obviously with Tableau, we support default background maps out of the box with a number of styles, light, dark, and normal. But for a lot of folks in this room, if you want to work with ArcGIS Server or any publicly available services, you can do so out of the box in Tableau if it's WMS capable. It's been that way in Tableau for a very long time. You can also connect to WMTS, but you do need to configure the Tableau TMS file. So it's a little bit of modification to get that to work, and we can pull up some documentation or chat about that later if you want to know exactly how to. For custom background maps, we made it really easy to work with Mapbox inside of Tableau. So if you have a Mapbox account, you can go and create your custom style. Mapbox is really good because you can upload your data very easily. You can customize it, so it can be, you have full control over all the styling. They also have a number of preset styles, which are very useful as well.
And it's free.
Well, Ryan says it's
for
free.
Circumstances.
Yeah, free with some caveats,
Yep.
right? But I think Ashwin's going to talk a little bit more about that. And then background images. So not all maps are, geographic maps like we're looking at the world or local geography. They can be, a basketball court or an indoor venue. You can bring images into Tableau and map your data to be placed on top of them. So this is other ways in which you can work with background maps. And so, one of these pillars that we've tried to support in Tableau is that spatial data sources bucket. So shapefiles up until this, upcoming release where we have file geodatabases and such. We've also tried to work on this kind of middle pillar of actual analytical features, things that will help you do more advanced spatial analysis. So the 2018.2 release includes Spatial Join. And Spatial Join uses the standard predicate intersects to join data based on their spatial relationship. So they don't need a matching attribute to create a join. It's just based on location. And that works with just points and polygons. And it needs to be in a spatial column. So if you have two fields that are geometry, you can do this spatial join. But if you have latitude and longitude in separate columns, you need to convert those into a spatial column. If you don't know how to do that, we can explain it. Save that for the questions. And in 2018.3, we're going to support the density mark type, which gives you heat maps. The thing I like to say about heat maps that are kind of like the special part of Tableau is that they're not just for maps, right? Maps are basically just scatter plots, and you can use heat maps on scatter plots or dot plots or whatever way you want to visualize your data in Tableau. It's very flexible. If you can produce a mark, you can change the way it's rendered to be a heat map if you like. Don't always do it, though. Maybe we'll have Sarah chat about some of the do's and don'ts of heat maps because she wrote a paper about it. And then as far as interactivity, I just like to call this stuff out too. You know, we build a lot of mapping features, and we blog about it, we announce it. This is new for maps. This is new for maps. But there's so many other features in Tableau that really benefit working with maps. Viz and tooltips is one thing I call out. Set actions, which is coming, is going to be a very powerful interactive feature for working with maps. And all I'm saying is just think about these other external capabilities and how useful they can be. So even though you might not read, oh, there's nothing new in mapping in this release, if it was just set actions coming in 2018.3, you should be saying, oh man, set actions. Now I can use those with maps and do more analysis. So keep that in mind. All right. Maybe we can turn it over to Ashwin here, who can talk a little bit more about background maps and some of the stuff coming in 2019. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds good to me. So I was looking forward to this demo all week long. I'm honestly super excited to share this part with you guys. You may have seen a bit of it in Devs on Stage. Amanda, one of our colleagues, showcased some nice and smooth vector maps coming soon to Tableau. We all worked on that feature, and I am so excited to share it all with you guys. So I actually want to hop into a demo really quickly. Let's see here. So this is a tool that was built by our own team, and it actually showcases the difference between raster tiles, which is what Tableau uses today, and vector tiles, which is what Tableau is going to use in the near future. I just want to explain briefly for all of us in the room what exactly the difference might be. So with the raster tiles, what's actually happening is as we load this map and zoom around the map, we're actually loading in PNGs, imagine that, for each individual tile on the map. So we're loading in all these small pictures and putting them all together. Now with the vector tiles, what's going on is we're loading in these tiles into my browser, but then we're doing all the drawing dynamically. And this is amazing for what it can do for us as we explore the map. Let's take a quick look at some of the interactivity differences that you could see with these maps. So on the right side of the screen here, in this tool, this is a map that uses these raster tiles that I just talked about. And we're going to just zoom in a little bit onto the city of Paris, where I hope to go in the next year. So when I zoom in, we can see a few things there, right? The map loaded pretty quickly, and that was great. But what we also saw were a few rectangular chunks kind of appearing on the map, and then also some of those text labels were a little bit grainy at certain points, as the map was struggling to load in and keep up with my zooming in analysis. So what I want to do next, I'm going to zoom back out on the right side. I want to showcase how the experience might be different with these brand new vector tiles. So we're going to do the same exact zooming in action onto Paris. Look on the left side of the screen, everyone. It's super smooth, right? You don't get any more of those rectangular chunks loading into the map. All the text labels render dynamically and smoothly as you zoom in and out, which means no matter what the zoom level that you're at, everything looks pixel perfect. You might say, okay, great, this is a prototype. What about in Tableau? Let's get to that next. So what I've got here is a version of Tableau that has this vector tile capability built into it. Again, I want to stress, this is not in the product today, but this is the thing that we want to get out on the streets soon.
On the streets. Get it out there. Bootleg it.
That's the new business plan, Ken. All right, so what I'm going to do is just zoom in. And by the way, this is the viz that we saw in the Devs on Stage. Again, this is kind of honed in on Lake Tahoe, the pedestrian routes. So we're going to zoom into that part of the country. And this is in Tableau. Everything is nice and smooth. Cities appear and disappear as appropriate, and different parts of the background map load in extremely smoothly in a very performant manner. It feels really good, especially once you get your hands on it and you try it, and you try raster maps and vectors side by side. You're going to love the difference. But that's not it, right? With the vector tiles, sure, we get that nice and smooth interactivity, but there's more. One of the key things that I love to highlight are these mapping layers on the left side of the screen. Who here has used the mapping layers feature before in Tableau? Quite a few. And that's awesome, right? These things are great for turning on and off city labels, country labels, CBSAs, zips, to make that background as perfect as it can be for your use case. Well, in the next, or with this release, we're going to add in more mapping layers that you can use to make that background even better for your analysis. And again, this will be out of the box in Tableau. So in particular, Lake Tahoe, if you're unfamiliar, is a fantastic skiing place for Californians in the winter. It's a very mountainous area, a lot of tall peaks over there. But with this map, I have no idea about how mountainous the region might be. Well, if I go to the bottom left of the map layers pane and I click terrain, immediately I can see that in the background map, Tableau now has this contextual terrain shading, which means if I was unfamiliar with the region, I can now see that, wow, this is a pretty mountainous area. And there are a ton of awesome use cases where this could come extremely in handy. One that comes to mind is, imagine that I work for a national park service and I want to track the locations of different herd migrations. Well, now I can see where they may or may not be traveling. If I wanted to zoom in even more, and I wanted to really get down close to these maybe slips or waterfront properties in Tahoe, that's great. But this is kind of all we get in Tableau today. Well, in the future, we're going to have building footprints built into the product. These are updated constantly and most up to date with the latest structures. So if I go and turn on the building footprints layer, I can see all of these small buildings appear in the background of my map. And again, this is just more out-of-the-box contextual background data that you can use to make your maps even better right in Tableau. Those are just two, maybe we'll save questions for the end. Cool. These are just two of the layers that we're adding into Tableau. There are many more that are coming with the release, but I want to showcase one additional new thing that are coming with these vector tiles. So when Kent was saying and Ryan was saying that, come up and talk to us after about any requests you might have or things that you want to see in the product, we really mean that. And what I mean is, traditionally in Tableau, we have always offered only 3 map styles, right? Light, dark, and normal. But you have spoken and we have heard, and with this release, with the vector tile release, Tableau is going to offer 5 additional background map styles directly in the product out of the box. And these are accessible in the same way as light, dark, and normal are today. So if I go to the map layers pane in the top left of the screen and click normal, I now see that there are 5 new options up there: satellite streets, satellite, outdoors, streets, and basic. And each one of these are optimized for a slightly different use case. For example, the streets view might be something more akin to what we see in other mapping applications that we've used in the past. This is an extremely detailed and colorful map view that has building footprints, house numbers, terrain, and a bunch of other information built into the background. If I went to San Francisco or New York, I'd be able to see things like railway stations or subway stations, points of interest. All these other important contextual pieces of information are going to be built into this style. Now, one of my favorite styles that we're going to add to the product is the satellite style. And this is awesome because it lets me get that fully rendered, cloudless, 22 zoom level deep satellite view of the map. And I am so excited to share this with all of you and to say that this is coming to Tableau soon. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit about it, just about like previously background maps. You needed to manage your own Mapbox account to get some of these preset styles easily, right? Well, this is powered by Mapbox. We're using their styles. Now, the only thing that's different is when you look at light and dark and normal, we're applying our cartography, and the way in which we design maps are a little bit different than the way they design maps. Streets is one we took out of the box, and streets is used a lot for navigation-specific things, which isn't necessarily a primary use case in Tableau. But the thing that I see some of these styles used a lot with is in Tableau Public. So just from a creative, artistic, and aesthetic sort of presentation perspective, the new styles give you some flexibility with respect to that as well. We're obviously super excited about it, and I think there's a lot more detail in there that even Ashwood could really even get into. But yeah, that stuff's out of the box. You don't need a Mapbox account to use these things. It's all in Tableau. There you go. But if you have custom Mapbox maps, you obviously still need your Mapbox account. We don't know anything about your maps or the data you've used in your maps, so you still need to maintain that. Okay. Let's just time check a little bit. So we're about almost halfway through the session, which is perfect. And I think from here, it'd be good if we really turn it over to you guys. I don't know if Mr. Audio Video guy in the back there, if we have the lights, we could turn them up a little bit, or I don't know if there's a way to turn the lights up on the audience a little bit so we can all see each other. But I know there were a few questions. There was a gentleman over here and over here. And from this point forward, we just want to open it up and say, okay, what are the things that are most important to you? What are the types of things you want to do? What do you want to see? And I'm not going to preempt any of these questions with this is what happens with ArcGIS, or this is what happens here. We want you guys to ask the questions, so feel free to raise your hands and stand up and speak, and we'll repeat the question in case you can't hear it. And we'll do that. I think this guy may have been first up.
Thanks. I live in Europe, and I use mapping on a more basic level. For country, I always use the ISO standard 2-letter codes because it works great with Tableau. However, lately countries change, and you have countries nowadays that don't have an ISO code. For example, Kosovo, which is split, and the Central Republic of the Krim, that is also one. How can you show that data when you don't have a country code? Do I have to build a whole new data set with geolocations and longitude, latitude, or is there a faster way that I can say, okay, in this case, I have my own country code, the ISO standard has some options for your own definition, and it should be this polygon for that map.
That's a great question. I'll take that one. So you're totally right about Kosovo and its country code. I believe so I was actually looking at Kosovo recently, and there is a temporary ISO 2 code. I think it's XK. Actually, I've seen two different ones, and that's one problem. But actually, I'd be happy to talk with you after this, and we can actually update our geocoding database and add those 2-letter codes so that you can continue to use your data sets. Would we get the data from our vendor? They don't always include updated ISO 2 codes, and so that's just something we can bring into in our next data load. We can make sure we either manually update those to make them current, or if you have suggestions on what we should be using. And like I mentioned before, we have the ability to have synonyms. So if there are multiple two-digit ISO codes, we could add the whole list of them so that any of them would work.
I think that guy over there had the next question.
So I had two questions. One was based on the presentation, you guys put properties on the map. Is the square footage going to be available, or is it just seeing the on the map?
First question was about, can you see the square footage of the building footprints in the layer? So there's no properties exposed for any of those layers. Like for terrain, there's actually peaks that are marked on the map, but you can't figure out the actual elevation at any particular point. It's just a contextual background layer. So there's no other property that's available with respect to the building footprints or any other layer specifically.
So my next question is, Tableau
So the question is asking, is there an easier way to build path files for his specific workflow? Sarah, I'm gonna call you out here because you've done a lot of work with paths and looking at some of these routes. Do you have, I know you're not mic'd up, but do you have a blog post or anything that talks about this? Or in your session later this afternoon, do you dig into details about working with path marks?
So we have some detail on, I'll just talk into Kent here. So we do have some detail on just straight line paths, but not necessarily like if you're talking about paths that go along street routes. So we don't have any street routing capabilities that are built in natively in Tableau, so you do have to do those externally. But if you just need to draw the line between point A and point B, there are a lot of ways of doing that fairly easily, especially if they're long routes and you need a great circle route. You can use a KML file with just 2 vertices and get a great circle arc. Or if you just need the straight line in between, it's just, you can write a line string or do a 2-point line in Tableau.
Thanks. Does that answer your question? Great. All right, next. I'm bringing this up.
Oh. I don't have a good answer for that, so I'll
Well,
answer that.
are you just saying you have mixed level of geography, basically, and you want to visualize mixed level of geography? Depending on the country it's in. Yeah, so the question is, how do I mix different levels of geography? So if you have country and province, say, you might want to look at just the United States, but you want to see all the provinces of Canada. How do you place those two on the map? Yeah, Sarah has a suggestion here, which is possible. You could dual axis the two things, so long as the values are in the data set. That's one way to do it. Again, with spatial files, you have the ability to do something outside of Tableau to create the right data set, and then you can just bring it directly in. I'd have to think more about it specifically. There will be ways, you saw in the Devs on Stage presentation, using set actions, ways to do asymmetric drilling into a tree map. So there's a level of detail on the viz, and then there was some drilling. So depending on what you actually need to visualize, you're going to be able to do something similar with mapping geographies, but not necessarily exactly what you're asking for, but it might be usable. So again, we could talk more about that one. Let's try to cover all the folks in the room here. He already asked a question. He's back at the line.
Thanks. I just signed up for a Mapbox account. I want to be able to customize the layers and bring features out in the nav and Tableau. But I'm a little confused about when do you use Mapbox to upload data versus just loading the data into Tableau?
Yeah, so it depends on...
Repeat the question. Right?
The question is, when do you know when to upload data into Mapbox versus loading it directly, spatial data, versus loading it directly into Tableau? I think it depends on whether or not you want the data to be interactive. So you would want to upload it to Mapbox and bake that into the base map and the background map. If it's, let me say the flip. If you want to be able to hover over and get tooltips and do analysis in Tableau with your spatial data, then you'd load it directly into Tableau. If you want to use the spatial data to provide context for the base map, and it will not be interactive. You cannot click on it or interact with it or filter it. If you just want to display it for presentation purposes, then upload it to Mapbox and bake it into the base map. Okay. Happy to talk more about that after this too.
We'll go to the far right of the room. Yeah.
I know that you can load your own custom geocoding into Tableau. We have a file that we effectively call LOAG, letter of all geocoders. It includes SNPs codes, split codes, operating stations, running on a live database, can you connect to a live source for the custom geocoding?
The question is, can we?
Upload it, but as the data changes, can we do a direct live connection for geocoding?
I don't know the answer to that question. The question is about connecting to a live custom geocoding database, correct?
Yes.
No, so yeah, with custom geocoding, the question is just about working with custom geocoding essentially. And I'll just tell you how it works. Custom geocoding is built into Tableau, where you can upload your own data set into an existing role or create a new role, so long as you have the coordinates. You can create this in Tableau. This is the other sort of hidden aspect of geocoding. You want to use your own data source that's a separate data source from what Tableau uses, that is live. I mean, I'm essentially saying it's like using, not the same thing, but it's like using a shapefile or some other data source. Because you're going to take that data and then join it with your business data. It's very similar. It's not going to have the sort of easy kind of hidden magic of like using a geocoding service and just bringing in some data set. But if you want to use your own source of geocoding, like a different service, or whether it's a database or anything like that, I mean, you're going to have to take the data out and create a join using some other geography, like a shapefile or something. There's no way to replace our geocoding database with yours, which is essentially what you're trying to do.
Yes, or at least enhance it with other available data that we can.
Yeah, so if you have the data, right, you can load it into our geocoding database. Again, you only get to do that once, so all of the data has to be structured in a kind of a very specific way. And if you've ever tried to do it or read about custom geocoding in Tableau, it's like, okay, your column names need to match exactly how we have them stored in our database and et cetera. And then we reload all that data. And custom geocoding then creates a problem as well. So yes, you get the benefit of being able to use your own custom geography. But when we load all that data into the database, then we store this new copy of our geocoding database. And when you publish visualizations that use this database, we have to ship it alongside it. So it takes all the data with it, and it really bloats the size of workbooks when you do publishing and sharing. And if you were to upgrade your version of Tableau, well, we still don't want you to lose your custom geocoding, so you won't get the updated data because you have custom geocoding that's been replicated in this sort of side database. So it's a lot of like details in that, and it's not very robust to be able to use it easily between versions, etc. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right. You're in charge of questions, Ash.
Two questions. First, I know that in the US there's these data layers that can be used. I don't think it's present in Europe, at least not in the Nordics. So a question about that, if that's coming. Secondly, when using local regions that are sometimes ambiguous, like municipalities, names of municipalities, they're kind of for unknown or ambiguous values. Then you need to go in and say, okay, this is in Sweden. Everything else is in Sweden. I'm just wondering if that's a feature you've been thinking about, suggesting that, okay, it seems like we have multiple municipalities around the world with this name. Is this perhaps in Sweden because everything else is in Sweden?
We've definitely thought about that. We have a kind of a grand roadmap for geocoding.
Sorry, Ryan, what was the question?
Sorry, the question is, why can't geocoding be smarter and recognize that if all of my other locations are in Sweden, that some of my unknowns might also be in Sweden? So I'd say that's something we're thinking about doing. There are lots of improvements we'd like to make to geocoding feature. That's one of them, but I don't have a timeline. But that's definitely in the back of my mind. And so the other question was about demographic data layers, which are built into Tableau for the US only currently. And the question was, are we ever going to add those for anywhere outside of the US? I would actually hand that over to the PMs to talk about how we determine priorities for things like international demographics.
Well, I mean, one of the questions about data layers that we need to figure out too is where are we going to source all this data from, right? And so You know, you have a choice when you build in demographic or socioeconomic, or like someone's done some value add on the data and they want to sell it and license it, right? So from a business perspective and how we want to fit that into the product, there's a lot for us to think about. And then how do we ensure that we have the right data sets and the right kind of level of detail? You're not necessarily going to find the equivalence of what we have in the United States provided in the product, right? We use census tracts, and we have specific variables that are included. In other places, given the vendors, like if there's a census equivalent in the Nordic region, right, for each country, well, do they have similar geographies? We have to figure that stuff out. And if you want to map all of those countries, right, like here you have the USA, but imagine you want to look at USA and Canada. It would just, you wouldn't be able to compare the two because you wouldn't have the same data across the countries, right? I'm suggesting that Norway doesn't necessarily talk to Sweden as it looks at mapping its demographic data, right? This is, if they just shared it all, it would be so nice. So, it's a lot of effort to figure that out and get it into the product when that's the kind of feature that just doesn't get that much use. When we think of broad usage and common workflows in Tableau. So that's a little bit of prioritization is based on what are the types of questions people are using, what are the types of layers people need for visual analysis and comparative analysis, and if we've actually licensed the data, like we have in the product at this current moment in time, you can't actually use that data in analysis, right? You can't get the values out of it. It's just a visual layer. And does that get you enough, right? So it definitely gets you something, but we know people would like to actually touch the data and run a calculation or do something, right? So again, there's kind of more along that thread. There you go.
And I would say a workaround for that now would be to, if you have access to that demographic data for the regions you're interested in, if it's accessible, you can download it to your machine, then upload it to Mapbox, bake it into the base map layer, and then bring that in.
So hang on. There are questions about custom territories. I'm just going to show you this workflow real quick, right? Regions in Superstore. I can say create from state. Now if I bring state out onto the viz, let's make sure my region's in there. Oh, this is not Superstore. This is Global Superstore. What have I done? You never use Global Superstore. Let's see here. Let's just put region on there and see what happens. And let's go to the filled map. So yeah, there's a lot of regions in the Global Superstore. But you can see they're now individual marks. So if you're building sales territories, right, this could be John, this could be Betty. You see what I mean? So the question is, for this custom territory, how did that get built? The data set just simply had a field called region. And we just said, you know what, when I use region, the dimension, I want this to be a geographic field, right? I'm saying it's geography. So let's make it work like that. So it gets the little globe icon after I've made this choice, which is geographic role, create from underlying geography, right? Ashwin, you're in charge of questions.
How about over there? We've been neglecting on this side.
Yeah, sure. You can tell. Yeah, with your hand up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I saw your guys' demo the other day. It's pretty cool. You have the Google Street View, and I was wondering. Well, first, can you tell me how you did that? Was it an extension or URL action? But I was thinking about could it be in the viz within a viz, like in the tooltip, where you hover over a point and render like a picture.
Yeah, great question. The question is, how do I get Google Street View into Tableau? Sarah actually built this, so I might put you on the spot, Sarah, because you can talk about where your example lives and where people might be able to download it, because I don't have those links off the top of my mind. But Sarah, just give me a nod if I say the right thing. That was a web zone, like a web zone inside a dashboard. It's not a sheet, so you can't stick that into, like it's not a sheet that you could stick into Viz and Tooltip. I'm not sure if you can put a whole dashboard in Viz and Tooltip. I think it's just sheets. So you wouldn't be able to go that route. Sarah's is actually running a little bit of code to use Google Street View. Like it takes a little bit of code, because it's not Google Maps where you could just give it a URL. You need this API key, right? A Google Maps API key. Oh, you got one. Ashwin, do the dang thing.
So if you had come to my talk, you would have seen how to make this thing. So this is the kind of thing that Kent was talking about.
Are you trashing him or me?
So this is using that kind of web zone that Kent was mentioning, right? The way that we did this was using a dashboard action. So if we go to the dashboard thing, in the bottom left corner, there's an object here called a web page. And if I just drag that onto the view, and then in my data set, I have like the specific Street View URL that I got just from Google. I put that in the Excel spreadsheet or whatever data source is, and then I can just hook it up with a dashboard action, which we have tutorials about online. We can send those out as well.
Yeah. Sarah's example for Google Street View is on her Tableau public account, in her profile. This side of the room, anyone? Anyone? That dude right there.
So my question is, and I'll preface this by saying my main mapping capabilities is basic for the most part. There was a time that I was looking into, I work for a utility company, we have our own electrical boundaries, right? So I looked into Mapbox at that instant in time to try to import that into Tableau, and it wasn't successful. Could have been me, could have been my fault. But my goal is just to create my own, custom boundaries. It seems like you mentioned more than once Mapbox, but I was hoping that Tableau can do that for me.
Yeah.
I've done the custom Geocoding, but it's a separate layer. If I wanna plot other lats and longs onto it, I can't do that. So I've had trouble in the past, and then I never ventured back into it. So my question is, can Tableau duplicate what Mapbox can do? Because essentially I just want to load in my custom geocode and use that as a background image. Now you mentioned before you won't be able to interact with it. That's fine.
No, we got you. We got the question. You guys want to answer? Or you want me to? All right. Yeah, there's.
I'm gonna have to go to Sarah to get the response.
I think we got to get off stage here.
No. My funeral. The wake will be later this afternoon. That was a good burn. Game respect game. With Mapbox, building all those capabilities in Tableau is not something we want to do, but this particular workflow is really interesting, right? Because in the end, we don't want you to have to leave Tableau to go do things, right? Like that would just be easier for everyone if you didn't. But of course, Tableau's not going to do everything. But this particular workflow is possible. It's possible that we could tackle this and make it a product feature. But yeah, it's not exactly on our near-term roadmap. So near-term is just like wildly, ambiguous, and you have no idea what that means, I suppose. But in the next year, it's not something that we're going to focus on, like allowing someone to do that. But I'd say each of us are like, yeah, there's another person asking for that. And when we start to look at sort of the next sets of releases that are going to come, this is going to be one of those features that we talk about and really examine what it would take to build such a thing. Because we have a really good relationship with Mapbox, and now we have maps that are coming that are going to be powered by Mapbox, there's a path forward. I'd also say, through the extensions API, there might also be a way to do some customization. And it might look a little bit might look radically different in some ways, but there's ways in which you could build your own sort of extension web application that you could put into Tableau that might do some of this customization. Again, that's going to not be the completely integrated solution, but things are possible here in the future, obviously, just not in the near term.
And come talk to us afterwards. I'd love to just sit down and look at what you were trying to do and see if we can troubleshoot.
Should we get Sarah to answer the question? That was so good, I'm going to tell my wife that this guy burned me so bad.
Right here, please.
I have a question on ISO codes for provinces. So we grant in Salesforce all of our 3,000 provinces worldwide with ISO codes for getting the country and province level. We get about a 70% match rate on those. Is there a way with the synonyms to expand those to include, let's say, the country code dash ISO code for province so that we get better match rate?
Let's talk after this. Yes.
What was the question?
The question was ISO codes for countries as well as provinces. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, 'cause sometimes
And
the code is the same, you know, the 2 or 3 characteristics, but at the province level, it's the same that province, but it's so
sure.
you can't use traditional.
Yeah, so questions about improving our coverage for ISO codes globally for countries and provinces. So we can talk about
I will
that.
say, it is interesting to hear, like, at least, 2 or 3 people are bringing up this thread about just automatic geocoding. This is the way I store the data. Can we get these codes to work? Again, if anyone else has any other specifics as it relates to geocoding, types of codes that are common in the country in which you're working with data, please let Ryan or any of us know. We'd love to chat about it.
Maybe over here.
Question about zip codes and postal codes. So when you put a zip code in, you get a dot on the map. Do you have an underlying latitude, longitude
Correct,
zip code?
correct.
Now, is that available to us?
So, yeah, if you go and view data, you can see it, right? It's called generated latitude and longitude, but that is the value that is placed at. And of course, a zip code, when you see a point, this is just the centroid, or an approximate centroid of the actual boundary. But even the boundary is a little bit fuzzy when you think about actual postal code boundaries, which are meant to be these like delivery zones, right?
So an idea of something which might be embeddable in Tableau, because if you have a bunch of people with the same zip code, and for privacy reasons, you don't want to go any more detailed than zip code centroid. What we've done is some work where we take the zip code with, let's say, 400 people, and we move the latitude longitude by thousandths of a degree north and then up and over. So you can build circular splits of the same zip code so that you don't have everybody stacked on one single dot.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to use tooltips on individual people. And I've actually done that work with 45 zip codes. That's something which Tableau might want to put in to the product to let people do that sort of thing.
Yeah, are you telling us to do it, or are you asking a question?
I've done it. I would give it to you if it would be of any value to other Tableau users.
Well, I mean, I would say this case of working with overlapping marks is really the thing, right? It's not so much about zip codes. It's about data that sits on top of each other that might be coincident or so close that it's hard to really see where it's differentiated, or it might not be at all. And you can move that data and adjust it or jitter it so that you can move it off the spot so that you can visualize each of those individual things. There's a workflow that's, there's Tableau blogs about it that you can read to see how to do it. This gentleman's volunteered to put his visualizations in Tableau Public that anyone can download. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I mean, building that type of functionality in Tableau, again, you can use calculations to manipulate the data, but not generated latitude and longitude, which doesn't work in calculations. Yeah. Thanks.
So I have a blog post on community forums with 3 or 4 different ways to generate.
Sarah's, I was going to not go back to Sarah after the burn, and I know she's got the blog post. I was trying to be generic about it, like, we're just going to let Sarah sit there. But no, Sarah does have a blog post. It's very detailed. It's very good. And it talks about 4 different ways in which you can jitter data. We already plugged your blog post at the start. Sarah's really the celebrity of this talk. I mean, we didn't put her on the slide, even though we were like, get her on the slide. I don't know what happened, but we're just going to read her blog. We're going to read her blog the rest of the time.
It is up here.
How
Go
much
for it,
time do we
yeah.
have?
Got a few minutes.
All right, so we do have 5 minutes left. Let's make sure we get this guy in the black shirt, and we'll try to do one more question after that, and then we can stick around for a few minutes if we haven't got to things that people want to ask about.
Typically, if you want to, say, map sales data
Oops.
at state level, and then also zip code level on the same dashboard, you have to create 2 worksheets that click on a state, and you'll see the zip codes change to that state. Why can't you, is there a way to have one map that as you zoom from an upper level down, it changes from the granularity of state to zip code, and then let's say census tracts, you move down, I know that you have to hook into the zoom to know at what point you
Yeah.
want to have a journey.
Well, I would say, so the question is not so much a question, it's a request for a feature that would change the level of detail as you zoom to the map. so to show a more granular view of the marks as you move down. I will just say that we acknowledge the request. There are not going to be interactive ways in which you can do that via Zoom anytime soon. But like I mentioned before, using set actions, there are going to be ways in which you can cause a drill. You can certainly do it with widgets on the side, like parameters and things like this. I know you can build the experience, but it's not the same as zooming, and I get it. That would be nice to have. It's definitely something that we want to enable. We just haven't got to it. Thanks. Let's just do one more question. If you can make it short, you're in the vest, or yeah, vest.
Possibility of heat spot mapping that's 3D element to it.
Yeah, the question is, can I see a 3D version of a heat map or 3D anything? So right now, that's the path forward there is to work with some of the upcoming extensions. So Mapbox has actually created an extension for doing some analysis that allows you to do extrusion, and you can actually visualize the data in 3D. I'd suggest going down to their booth where they can talk to you all about it. They're going to open source the code for the extension, so you can actually tailor it to your needs if you want. All right, so we'll wrap up here. Everyone clap for Sarah, who answered the question. And thank you for coming.
It was a joke, by the way.